now. Let me just double check that.
Yep,
Perfect.
looks good.
All right. So if you just want to introduce yourself, and then later on I'll introduce myself, and we can talk about more about this field.
I know, I'm excited to talk to you. Well, my name is Marcy Hecker, and I'm currently a program specialist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And specifically, I'm in the Division of Birds, and I work in the Feather Identification Lab. So it's very specific
Yes.
tasks, but in an amazing place.
Yeah. So this is part of why I was so curious about this because I am a university student here in Windsor, in Canada, completely
Mhm.
different countries, but still kind of related. And I am studying in my bachelor's, I'm finishing off my bachelor degrees in forensic sciences. And during the course of the summer, I had the opportunity to work with the Pelee Island Bird Observatory, which we just named PIBO, and they had a specific research program going on about how many bird collisions there is in the Windsor area, specifically in the downtown area where there's a lot of tall buildings with a lot of glass reflecting and birds crossing in their migratory path, they're going to collide into it. So part of my program is that I will go around and survey the area and just collect data and put it in the global bird collision mapper. And
Right.
that data is going to help them in the future for like to have an actual specific number behind
Mhm.
everything that they've been doing.
Okay. All right. So that's like an internship with them that you're doing?
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
it's an internship with them. And with them, I have realized that there's a whole new forensics field that I did not know that existed, like that is linked with ornithology. And as I'm doing research, I'm finding more and more information, and it's getting interesting to me, and
Mhm.
possibly something in the future that I could
Yeah.
do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, with ornithology, we're part of the bigger wildlife forensics.
Yes.
So when I think of us, and let me kind of give a disclaimer at this point
Yeah.
that um, I might use the word forensics in describing what we do in our lab, but we are not law enforcement.
Yeah. No.
Right? And so that's the true forensics, right? To argue your case.
Yes.
And sometimes, we kind of got that label because of we do um, essentially the same techniques with the same goal, but we do not do any law enforcement unless we're asked to consult. So I do have to kind of put that disclaimer out because sometimes the term forensics gets kind of put on to our lab.
Okay.
But we work very closely with the forensic community, and we hopefully have the same standards and do very, very similar work. So, our day-to-day work, have you kind of looked into our lab, like
Yes.
specifically what we do? Okay.
Yeah. I've seen how the feather identification lab has helped processing specimens and then either identifying them with either DNA barcoding or even just microstructures of the
Uh-huh.
feathers themselves.
Right. That's my specialty is the micro,
Okay.
is looking at feathers under microscope. So that's very similar to like trace evidence. It falls under
Exactly.
trace evidence, right?
Yeah.
So we've worked with a lot of hair and fiber people. We've worked with different, like as a consults for different organizations, FBI or other law enforcement.
Yes.
But our day-to-day work is identifying the birds that collide with aircraft for bird strikes is the term we use. That's our day-to-day
Exactly. Like
work.
aviation safety.
Aviation safety, we fall under flight safety, and that's also where we get our funding from.
Okay.
So even though we're at the Smithsonian, we are Smithsonian employees, but Dr. Carla Dove, that's our program director that
Yes.
you contacted. She's got us a MOU with the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy, and the FAA, who
Okay.
controls the North United States aviation. So that's where our funding comes from. which is always important. So, but our day-to-day work really is just bird strikes.
Bird
And
strikes, yeah.
then sometimes we'll be pulled in to consult on different things, and that would fall into law enforcement.
Exactly. But I think that that's how this whole identification lab started, right? With the
It
bird
is
strikes with Roxy
with
in the beginning.
Roxy. It did. She um, back before the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was even called Fish and Wildlife Service, she worked
Yeah.
for the pre-agency, and she did law enforcement work. That was part
Okay.
of her job, was helping the agents with usually poaching cases or occasionally a criminal act. I know she did a couple of murder cases, um, usually mostly poaching.
Okay.
And that's how she started it. And then she kind of, through time, went on um, to the Smithsonian, moved on, and kind of fell into the niche of the bird strikes. But Roxy was always a champion for her agents, and she did call them her agents. Yeah, she worked very closely with them. Roxy is the one that so this was back in probably Roxy started in the 1940s
Okay.
at the Smithsonian, but her when she was doing forensic work, that was more like the 60s and 70s and a little bit into the 80s.
Okay. So later on, but was
Later on.
she
Hmm.
exactly? Because I believe she was like the first like pioneer in ornithology to actually start identifying birds in bird strikes.
Yeah, there had been a little bit already of work on like the microstructure of
Okay.
feathers, and when I say microstructure, I'm particularly talking about the fluffy downy part.
Oh, okay.
That's the part that we use for ID. The part that you see on the bird is great. It's really cool. It's kind of like Velcro kind of hooklets, but for ID, all you can say is it's a bird.
Yeah.
So the characters we're looking at are down, pardon the pun, down in the down. Um,
It's okay.
yeah, right. And Roxy picked up on some past research on that. And specifically, there was a man called Asa Chandler back in the 1920s actually published a monograph on it. And he started to see there were taxonomic similarities of this
Okay.
microstructure. And then Roxy picked up on that. And then she's the one that just kind of really grabbed that, started studying it. And what she did is a little bit of research, but she started applying it to like forensic
Exactly.
ID. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where it really started, was with Roxy.
Okay. Did you get the chance to work with Roxy?
I did. I
You
did.
did?
I was her last student. I
Wow.
was privileged enough to work with Roxy. I I started as a volunteer, and so at that time, I came in at the right time where Roxy was kind of transitioning, getting to the point where it was really hard for her to come in, and Carla
Okay.
was finishing, kind of stepping up.
Okay.
So I was in a good place to where I could kind of help Roxy and let Carla finish her schooling. It just worked out for all of us. So I did a lot of casework with Roxy, yeah. And she was a tough cookie. She was a tough teacher. You had to have a thick skin for Roxy. And she was for a few students. Yeah, she did.
Out
She
of
was
the
tough, but good.
That's good though. And this might be a bit more of a personal question, but I'm also trying to do more publications with the PVL Island, specifically on women in ornithology.
Yeah.
How is that experience for you? Like seeing that there was already like women in this field, and maybe later on accepting more women, because that's
That's
also something that like it's pardon my saying, but it's a very white male dominant field.
mhm. Especially like, Carla started about 30 years ago and I started about 20 years ago. And even then there were women in at that time, but not many. Now, my opinion is that's changed a lot.
Okay.
But when Roxy was around, right, like the 1940s,
Yeah.
there were not many women in ornithology. There were not many women in science.
In science, yeah.
And both Carla and I, that's one of the things that we're very, very proud to be students of Roxy, who she was great. Roxy really didn't care that you were a woman. You just had to be the best.
Exactly. To
She
prove
didn't care
yourself
what,
in your field.
yep. She did not care what religion, what color, what, gender. And she really didn't, genuinely didn't. And if you weren't the best person and the best at your work individually, then that you didn't make it, you know.
Exactly.
And then if you did succeed, then everything comes with it. Kind of quiet.
That's true.
She was very humble. It was kind of like, I'm the best at feather ID. And I happen to be a woman from the South, right? you know, but she kind of brought that with her gracefully. And I love now working with girls to try to get them into specifically wildlife.
Yeah.
That's starting to change, but really, when I started 20 years ago, there were not that many women in like real deep wildlife work.
Yeah. Wildlife programs.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if she knew that I was talking to you, a forensic science student, she would be loving it. She would, she would be, oh,
Yeah.
good, good,
Well,
good.
what I've noticed in my classes at the university when I started my program my first year in 2018, I noticed that we were a lot of women in this field, and I was actually impressed by it because I've always grown up with the idea that like especially like law enforcement, it was a
Right.
very male dominant. But then when I learned that there is a science part of it that could
Mhm.
help the law enforcement, and then I saw
Exactly.
the amount of women in this field, I was impressed.
Mhm. Yeah. And, that's the way it should be. And I totally get it because early on, like I hooked into wildlife forensics really early. And I remember going to my first wildlife forensics meeting, and there were, you know, a handful of women.
Yeah,
But there were some diehards there, the undercover agents and, you know, some big time people there. And I'm like, okay, wow, you know. But then the last meeting I went to, it was probably 50-50.
yeah,
So it's like I've been able to see that change. And so that's cool. I'm really happy to see that. And then of course I'm more of a science lab nerd than I am.
it's so good. I am too.
And then I am happiest behind a microscope, right?
Yeah,
And if that's where my skill can benefit, the whoever you're working for, as Roxy said, her agents or whatever, right?
exactly,
Then I think that's pretty cool that I get to help whoever our
exactly.
clients are.
And then help, and then just continue on the legacy.
Yes. Yes, which you're doing.
Yeah,
That's which you're
exactly.
doing. This is awesome. Um,
In the future, exactly. I had some questions for you,
sure,
specifically
go ahead.
about the work you guys do and how it can help. Well, we already talked a tiny bit about aviation, but we'll talk about it a bit more
Okay.
specifically. You did talk about your specialty, which is microstructure. Sorry about
Mhm.
that.
Yep.
What is like the method itself involved in it? Like I'm obviously microscope and looking at itself, but what are like some fragments of it that you could like easily identify that or put it into another program in order to identify a bird?
I've That's a good question. And I've always said Roxy took me, I was not a birder I was a mammal person when Roxy got a hold of
Okay.
me. So she started me on the microscope before I even knew my birds, like bird watching.
Okay.
So I had kind of learned in reverse my birds. And I think it actually it helped because if you take like a typical bird watcher, right, and flip it backwards. So when you go
Okay.
to look at, like you're going to go bird watching, you look at the whole bird, you listen to the song, you look at different colors, and then what you do is you take like the large snapshot and you just start going in, going in, going in, and to get down to a species answer. We're the same. It's just opposite. We start with tiny, small stuff and work out, out,
Okay.
out, out. And, but, since I had to kind of learn both ways, they're both very similar. It's amazingly similar to look at one feather, a single body feather. And if you start logically thinking, kind of building on those characters, building on the characters, building on your information, like time of day and location and environment and stuff like that, we
Yeah.
start in our head building a picture of this bird from this one feather. And then the big thing, and you being a forensic scientist, you'll understand this, we never make a final call without comparing it to a vouchered specimen,
Exactly.
right? And
Yeah.
that's where the Smithsonian comes in. That's where our bird collections come in.
Yeah.
Is I can take that one feather and go out and say, oh, I think this is a spotted sandpiper or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'll go out and get a spotted sandpiper and match it up. Maybe it won't fit, and then I'll have to start over.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one of those clues is that feather microstructure. That's the characters in the down is just one piece of the puzzle. But it's just kind of like, instead of deconstructing, if you're looking at the
You're
whole
you're
bird,
just
we are constructing,
you're
right?
building. Exactly.
Yeah,
You're just building piece by piece.
yeah, but it's really the same concept. I've
Yeah.
always said, we bird in reverse.
I mean, it's a good concept. I think I'll talk about that in that way
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Bird in
I mean,
reverse.
it does, because if I'll have like really, these exceptional ornithologists will come in and work with us, and they'll be like, well, I'm like, no, just think about it, right? You know where shorebirds are going to be. You know what their behavior. This is the way the feather looks, and all of a sudden
Exactly.
you see this light bulb go on. They're like, yeah, it's just like the bird. I'm like, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
you're just looking at it in a different way.
Yeah. Through a different lens, let's say.
Definitely.
Yeah. And about the collection in the Smithsonian,
Oh yeah.
how
Wow.
I've been looking at the collection, how many different species there is.
Yeah.
Are they, I'm guessing, like you guys have restricted access because in order to go and compare the feather itself, in order to match it, but is there like let's say like a good display at the Smithsonian? Because I've never been. My family has, but I've been dying to go to the Smithsonian, and
Oh
now that I
my
can see
gosh.
all this ornithology behind it, I'm like interested
Yeah.
in seeing it in person.
So are you familiar with natural history museums? Have you been, like, you've been to a natural history museum?
Yes, I've been I believe one in Ottawa here in Canada,
Uh-huh.
and I
You have
think
an exceptional one. Yeah.
yeah, there's that one, and I think I also went to the one in Montreal, but I was younger because
Okay.
I'm originally from Montreal.
Oh, nice. Beautiful
Yeah,
city. Um, so it's with natural history museums, y- they're kind of actually split in two. So it's what the visitors see, the exhibits, and
yeah,
believe it or not, the researchers don't have much to do with that. That's actually a whole separate like education department.
yeah. That's gonna be just for the public.
Right. Where I work and where all the research is done is back in behind the scenes in the
Yeah,
collections. And you can also get exceptional collections at universities. Um, Cornell's an amazing one. There's a
yeah.
number.
Cornell Lab. Yeah,
And so it's about the collections. And the collections are like the actual skins of the birds, could be
yeah,
bones, could be now it's tissue for DNA.
yeah.
So that's where we work. That's where Roxy worked and
Okay,
build it up. So over time, part of the agreement is the Smithsonian is part of that MOU agreement. So we have full access to the whole bird collection.
okay,
We are part of the bird division. We just don't do research, which is traditional. We're a little odd that we're service oriented,
okay.
right? So we have access to, I mean, if you looked at the website, We've got, I think the last count is somewhere around 640,000 specimens. So we're the third largest,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, third largest bird collection in the world. It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
So for us, for our work, for our forensic ID work, you're only as good as your reference and your vouchers, right? If you don't,
Exactly.
you don't have, established correctly,
What the specimen is.
yeah, like
Yeah.
correctly documented, you're not going to be taking that to court, right? Just off the top of your head.
No, that's true.
So that's where, you know, Roxy had, she knew and she did, she would take specimens or even the specimen number to court with her and say, this is the bird I compared it to. And look at this, you know. So that's kind of how we are deeply, deeply connected to the Smithsonian collections. We would not be there. I mean, we wouldn't exist if we did not have those extensive collections.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to kind of expand that. When Carla and I started doing DNA,
Yeah.
is now in our agreement, we have full access to our molecular lab at the museum.
Oh,
And that's where all of our molecular work is done, is in-house. Where a
oh,
lot of
that's
people would
incredible.
send it out. Yeah, it's crazy. It's amazing. The Smithsonian has been great in supporting us, and um, yeah, it's just been a very long, very good relationship. And to have access to not just the facilities, but the people,
Yeah.
you
Because
know,
specifically, like to have access to that molecular lab is
lab.
incredible
Yeah,
because then you can do it all there without having to wait
you
for
don't
the
have to wait.
results. Exactly.
Right,
You can just
right.
do it right
Or
away.
if there's a problem, if we have a fatality case that we've really got to get it together on and we're just not getting DNA, we'll call in a couple of other people and say, hey, we got it.
Yeah.
Get lend us some ideas. So we're spoiled rotten, I have to say. We get like we have access to not just the collections or the lab, but all the people, right?
Exactly.
So we use all of our resources.
But that's amazing. Like I didn't know that you could also like with the lab itself that you could do it right there and have like these amount of people helping you out in a case that you need like results right away.
Right. Again, it's kind of like, and of the large museums are like this, and the universities, is that our molecular lab is a shared space. I mean,
Yeah,
it's there. That's why we're there, is for
exactly.
research. So, yeah, we're just very lucky in the way it's grown, and lots of good people.
It's amazing. Now it just makes me want to go visit. Obviously, I know I'm not going to be able to access that part, but
Well, maybe
still,
maybe if you call us, we might be able to get you up there.
oh, that would be
Yeah, we can
great.
get you. I'm joking. We
I'm,
can get you up there, no problem.
oh my goodness, that'd be
You've already got
amazing.
it inside. You've got an inside contact. We'll get you up there.
Oh, thank God, that's
We would love,
amazing.
we would love to show you around. As a forensic scientist student, we would love to show you around.
Yeah, because this, like you're saying, it's not technically like forensics. It gets capped into
Right,
that
right.
field, but
Yeah,
at the same
I
time,
catch
yeah,
myself using the term, but technically we are not law enforcement and we do not go to court.
exactly. But at the same time, you do identify these birds
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
cases specifically for bird strikes. That's how
Mm-hmm.
this whole thing happened.
Yep.
And I think that in the beginning, bird strikes were not really viewed as an issue. Maybe like some people would find, I think I researched the word was snarge.
That started with us. Um, the story is, we don't totally remember. It actually came out of the prep lab where we actually prepare the specimens. So you kind of skin out birds and mammals.
Yeah,
And so sometimes you have kind of goopy stuff left over. And
yeah.
supposedly somebody we knew there, and I'm sorry, it's gross, but it's kind of a combination of snot and
It's
garbage.
okay.
And I'm sorry it's gross, but sometimes
No, don't
it's a
worry.
little gross. And it stuck. So that term snarge started years ago, I think, when with Roxy. I'm not even sure Roxy liked that term because she was very proper. But then once Carla and I came along, we kept using it. And then when Carlo and I would use it around the military guys, and they'd just think it was hilarious, and it kind of stuck. So we started using it just to educate our clients.
Exactly, just so they
Right?
know what it is.
Just so that, and they remember it.
Yeah,
They
I
remember
mean, it's
it.
stuck.
It works. It works. And still to this day, we have pilots saying, "Hey, I've got some snarge for you," and we're like, "Send it
Exactly.
on." And so I don't know if Roxy would like it. She would like us to be much more technical, but
Yeah, something, a word more
yeah, a
scientifically
little more
for it. Yeah.
scientific than
Yeah.
that. But it worked. We cracked up because it did make the Urban Dictionary.
Oh my goodness.
And
Okay.
I said, "Hey, once we made the Urban Dictionary, so that's it." No,
Exactly.
crazy.
It's stuck.
It's crazy how stuff like that happens. But we still use that term. And it's, yeah, we can get military from overseas saying, "Hey, I've got some snarge for you."
But if it's set, like if it's fixed, that's good because
It
now, like
does.
in the future of the aviation safety, they're gonna look for it and they actually like have a word for it, and they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, we can see what exactly we hit, like during
Yeah.
takeoff or
Yeah. And
something
these
like
are
that.
not like biology guys. These are
No.
engineers or and girls and women.
Yeah.
Women also, engineers and maintenance workers. They're not biologists or lab
No.
workers or anything. So I could sit there and use a technical anatomical term, but they're not going to remember it. Or be
No. Exactly.
interested in
They're gonna remember the gooey stuff
it. They
was on
will.
the engine.
Yep. Yep. They will.
Exactly.
So it's kind of a bittersweet term, but we'll keep it.
It's staying. It's stay. That's good.
Yeah.
Now, I also saw that speaking of the collections that you guys have, you also have not only specimens like in the taxidermy, but also let's say like nests or eggs of the specimens as well, just to see like the
Yeah.
difference in evolution.
Well, that's the whole point of a natural history collection. The entire point is simply to collect, identify, and describe variation.
Okay.
So, just any kind of evolutionary variation, we're all about that. So that'll be why, we may have a couple of hundred northern cardinals,
Yeah.
because take just a small snippet in one area, you're really not getting the full diversity of that one
Yeah.
species. And then as the natural history collections, our duty is to archive and care for those collections so that students like you can come
Yeah.
and use them. That's really the
Exactly.
bottom line, is we're there for research.
Yeah. And these collections, how, like, I'm guessing there's a whole taxidermy part of it as well. How are they stored? Like, is it like actual, just like drawers, they're
It
laid
is. Have you
out,
seen
or,
the real famous picture of Roxy with all the
yeah,
drawers? That's one aisle.
exactly.
We have 12 aisles. um,
Okay.
like that. That was a PR photo because it was kind of staged, but that's
Yeah,
exactly what I work in every day, is drawers of birds. Um,
exactly.
they are stored dry.
Yeah.
They're essentially just the skins, kind of wrapped around cotton. We do have a separate skeletal collection um, that goes through the domestic beetles. Have you guys studied domestic beetles yet? I don't know if you
Yes.
have. We use
I
the
I
same
had,
domestic
yeah.
beetles, and
I
they're
had an
amazing.
entomology class and it was
Did you?
amazing. Amazing.
Isn't it crazy? Yeah, they're very finicky, but boy, do they do a good job.
Yeah, they clean up everything.
They do. They clean up they're very hungry little creatures. So
Yeah.
we use the same thing. Um,
Okay.
so we have a beautiful skeleton collection. We have fewer eggs and nests. The majority of ours are the skins.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
And then we'll go down to, say a curator has a very specific thing, to where we'll keep certain body parts, like maybe brains,
Okay.
syrinx is the vocal
Yeah.
cords, right?
Yeah.
It's very important in birds. Um, we can get down to real specific special collections like that if it's
Oh,
required. And we do have, we call the pickles, or the alcohol collection is the entire bird, and they're
okay.
stored in ethanol.
Yeah, exactly. Just to preserve the bird
Yep.
and yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then
I didn't.
the tissue collection. There's a
Oh,
lot for for one bird now in this day and age. Just really gives a tremendous amount of information.
yeah. Especially now with the, I think the DNA barcoding, like the tissues must be like that's like your reference point.
That's ours. That's what we
Yeah.
use. So
Okay.
barcoding is amazing. I am a huge proponent. Works obviously great for us, but it does have limits that
Yeah.
you have to understand. That it's just like you're just looking at a little tiny snapshot, and it's very good for vertebrate identification, like very basic, what is it?
Exactly.
It's not great for taxonomy or phylogeny. You need to get into much,
Oh.
much deeper genetics for that.
Okay.
It's a very kind of shallow, like
It's like the
literally just
surface.
exactly. It's just, what is it? What is this matching with? And for
Okay.
birds, we go to 98%, so we accept anything. We found there's a 2% variation
Yeah.
using this. It's the cytochrome oxidase 1 gene, mitochondrial gene.
Okay.
Um, and actually, it started at Guelph.
Oh, Guelph
Yeah,
University.
yeah,
Wow.
that's where it's based, and we've been up there, and at the time, Carla was wanting to do molecular work, and we had at the time started hearing about this barcode thing for ID, and we're like, oh, we're going to have to go DNA, and started looking into it, and it really worked really well for us, because that's all we're asking in the feather lab is, what is it?
Exactly.
It's all the other researchers in the museum, the other ornithologists, they're the ones that are like getting deep in the weeds, right? Like who's related to who,
Yeah.
is it a cryptic species, is it, that types of stuff. So some people look at barcoding, they're like, and it does have limits, and the limit is if something's very closely related, it can't tell it
Yeah.
apart.
Exactly.
And so you just have to still know your birds. You have to know your birds and your species of what's currently being accepted. Um, and as a forensic scientist, you might, that's an important thing. So if you have to go to court, you have to be ready to
To
name
present
something
history. Yeah.
of what is the current nomenclature, and does your
Exactly.
evidence go with the current nomenclature. So I know a
Yeah.
couple that have gotten caught up in like really closely related, where sometimes the taxonomy is still in controversy and it's
Yeah.
switching back and forth. Yeah, I know somebody that has gotten caught up in that, but to me, it's really interesting.
Yeah, because you can still, yes, you can say that they're closely related, but you have an idea of what it's going to be.
You definitely do, and
Yeah.
I've heard folks in the true forensic world, like for their standards to go to court, they really do need. Uh, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know if you've talked to many wildlife forensic people, a lot of them sometimes aren't too crazy about barcoding or
Yeah.
cytochrome
Okay.
oxidase. It works great for what we do, for being
Yeah.
service oriented. And that's where it has limits. And being kind of a public database, um, just stuff gets mixed up, and you have to be able to see, like, if there's possible mistakes in the core database.
Okay.
And that's a huge argument in the wildlife forensics now, is that they can't really, I don't know if trust is the right word, but they can't rely on these public databases, genetic databases like GenBank,
Yeah.
like Bank and Bark and Bold, Barcode of Life,
Okay.
because there are some inherent mistakes in there. And so I know the last meeting I went to was a couple years ago in Denver, and they had a very good discussion about it. And it was good for me because I had to understand. I'm like, hey, just kind of take it. You get your result, and you have to be able to interpret it, but they can't really take that into court.
Yeah.
So currently, the last that my vibe is that organizations or law enforcement groups, like maybe a state lab, were still creating their own database
Yeah. So here, for
because they
example,
can
in
control that, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
That's what was going to be my next question. Since you already told me that it was a public thing, do you think that maybe in the future there could be like, let's say like a state DNA barcoding type of thing that you could identify birds in? Because here in the forensics field, I know that there's CODIS, which is
Mm-hmm.
the for DNA. There's also the APHIS, which is for fingerprints. This is more in the forensics field, but there could also be like a database like that probably in the future in order to, let's say, be able to go into court and be
Mm-hmm.
accounted reliable per se the judge says
Mm-hmm.
it.
Right. Um, this is just my opinion. And remember, I'm outside of the law enforcement world.
Yes.
My opinion is somebody's going to have to come up with a much more quality controlled way uh, of submitting and accepting sequences.
Okay.
Because I know the standards, and I'm not uh, kind of bad mouthing barcoding. I love it. Um, but I think it's gotten so big, kind of like GenBank, it's kind of turned into a monster
Yeah.
where the quality control is really hard. It's very, very difficult to proof, ground truth that much information. Um, I think, are you familiar with the group Traffic?
No.
Traffic is a global wildlife, um, forensics and wildlife law enforcement organization. They're
Okay.
kind of the premier in the world.
Okay.
And um, the last I heard, they may be trying to create that for forensics,
Okay.
create their own, a little more
Like
controlled, maybe not so
program, let's say.
openly,
Yeah.
yeah, not so openly public to where it's,
Exactly.
you know, um, actually, it was at that meeting, it was traffic people that were talking about that.
Yeah.
And
Giving a presentation.
yeah, yeah, they were part of that. And my honest opinion is I have to agree with them because we do 10,000 IDs a year in our lab, and we see a lot. We see a lot of inconsistencies that um, aren't, you know, they're not earth shattering, but you would not be able to take into court, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah.
And,
They're still present, and because they're so recurrent, like
mm-hmm,
it's
yeah,
not. Yeah. It wouldn't be admissible at court, let's say.
yes,
But
yes.
this
And
group.
even just, a researcher, but like sometimes you need a researcher that maybe isn't quite as in tune with like current taxonomy and stuff. We'll find something on Bold and just get really excited about it, and you're like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. We need to we need to look at this a little.
Exactly.
It's not just as easy as typing on your keyboard. It's there. You
Yeah.
got to.
No. That's why I think that the whole scientific community is important in that, because then you can peer reviewed and do more
Yes.
research about like this methodology and just continue on and
Yep.
see how you could reduce like variations and stuff like that.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I hope, I kind of hope, again, my personal opinion, that a group like Traffic will kind of create their own molecular database.
Yeah, that way it can help. And this group Traffic, you said that it was for wildlife, right?
Traffic is only for wildlife.
For wildlife. So this would be for,
They're
let's
awesome.
say,
They're the real deal. Yeah.
that's incredible because like I wanted to know if like obviously I'm guessing poaching or identifying birds and like exotic trafficking and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Is it something that you guys have like had to help with? Just because let's say that you find
Mhm.
a specific feather or
Right.
parts of the animal, then you can identify where it has traveled or whatnot.
Yeah. Well, we kind of take everything that we've learned with bird strikes, because we do
Yeah.
a huge volume, and we have this very, very specialized focus, um, that we're happy to consult with anybody that has any feather material. And that could be, um, sorry, I got distracted. We have a storm here. I just saw a
It's
thing of lightning,
okay.
and I'm like, oh, that was close.
It's okay.
What else? And they're like, okay, Roxy.
You're like, hey.
Yeah, she's down there like, you better do good. Um, what was like, oh, just taking our specialty and applying it to anything from prey remains to law enforcement to, we actually, the second biggest reason we do feather ID is probably for anthropology artifacts,
Okay,
feathers and
from like ancient.
yeah,
Wow.
we do that quite a bit. Now, a lot of that is because anthropology is down the hall from us. And they kind of come over and, can you look at this headdress? And you're like, oh my gosh, look at that beautiful thing. So we do a lot of anthropology work. Um, but you, I mean, it's a lot of prey remains is for like a lot of ecological studies.
Yeah.
And occasionally law enforcement. Now we're still in touch. We have a really good relationship with the FBI Trace Evidence Lab.
Yeah.
And like we've trained some of their hair people on feathers, and if we have some oddity, like they let us come over and consult with them too. Um, but recently, I've kind of noticed the law enforcement work has reduced. It's kind of like we wanted to stay in our lane, right? To
Yeah.
just stay with the bird strike work. And I have to give a shout out, and I'm hoping, have you contacted or been in contact with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Forensic Lab?
I did. They haven't answered back.
Okay.
But I'm also going to go to the airport here in Windsor to learn more about their wildlife program, specifically for aviation safety.
Okay.
Because,
So, all right. So, like two things, right? Wildlife forensics versus bird strike work,
yeah.
right? So, for wildlife forensics, I can send you a contact that, my colleague over there in ornithology, I can send you a contact
Okay.
that, and let me try to get you connected with her because she's
That's amazing.
the real deal. She's the real forensic scientist.
Let me
And
see. Is it possibly I might have contacted her? Let me see. Is her name Ariel Gaffney?
Ariel
Yes.
Gaff.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, has she not gotten back with you yet?
No, she hasn't.
Okay, let me email
I'll
her.
try again.
Let me see if I can. Yeah, I know she may be out of the country right now, but let me put in a word for you for that,
Thank
for
you so
for
much.
the wildlife forensics. Before I forget, I've been sitting here writing notes. I want to give you. Uh, have you heard of SWIFS? SWFS is the Society for Wildlife Forensic Sciences.
No, I feel like I've seen this abbreviation at some point
SWIFS.
during my research. Yeah.
Okay. They have a meeting coming up.
Oh, yeah?
in I think October in Ashland, Oregon. And
Okay.
Ashland is there where the United States Wildlife Forensic Lab is.
Yes,
It's exceptional. That's where Ariel works.
exactly,
Um,
yeah.
if you could make that meeting, like just talking to you, if wildlife forensics is something you're interested in, I would
Yeah,
strongly recommend you go to that meeting.
okay.
And I can send you a link. They might even have like student options.
Okay. Just to
So not
see
to
if
get
like a
off on a
student
tangent,
could
because I know you have questions, but
come in.
that's the other one, like you really need to contact Swifts.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, because like the whole wildlife forensics too is kind of part of also like with ornithology. It's just like the bigger picture, let's say.
it's we are part of that. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's also another interesting aspect that I didn't know that like I think I've seen it a bit in class of like how my forensic anthropology teacher like identify a specific not bird remains, sorry, bear remains
Hmm.
from
Yeah.
an attack, and then they could like just with the skull they could identify that this bear hadn't been like
Yep.
in contact with this, and so that
Yep.
was something that I was like I didn't know that you could actually like also have another field of it.
Yep. It's the same application that you guys
Exactly.
use in human, just on a wildlife end, and there is
Yeah.
a huge market, a very big need for that, because you'd be amazed. I won't bore you with like stats on. I'll get them off my soapbox here on like wildlife
It's all
trafficking. There's
good.
we desperately need proper scientists and proper law enforcement and proper laws. The laws
Put in
haven't caught
place.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So sometimes working with wildlife is a struggle, but I feel like it's for the wildlife, it's in a big change right now, or of an improvement right now.
Okay.
So
Yeah, but then yeah, with the future, just like if you have more people that are in the field, it's gonna be easier to like have better changes.
yeah, and they have to be certified. They have to be forensic scientists. You
Exactly.
know, it has to be done in the proper way.
Yeah.
Um, so then I'll take that hat off and put on my bird strike hat. That I'm
Okay.
glad you're going to the airport.
Yes, I'm so excited. I was supposed to have a meeting with them last Friday, but something came up in the airport. It's a
Yeah,
small airport here in Windsor, so they told me to reschedule. So hopefully this Friday I'll go over with them and just see what their wildlife program is, because they
yeah,
do whatever type of wildlife they capture in the airport, they will rehabilitate. But I was interested to know what they do actually with the birds, because the birds, when you relocate them, they're birds. They will fly wherever they want to.
yes, they will.
So I
Uh,
wanted to know more about the bird specific program that they
like
have.
the wildlife control, like,
Exactly.
yeah, or mitigation. Sometimes that it's called wildlife mitigation. It can range anywhere. The most common is like exclusion, like fencing. Actually, not with the
Okay.
animals, right? It's kind of like your yard. You fence them out.
Yeah.
The number one thing that airports do is change the environment and try to change what's attracting them,
Okay.
right? So sometimes, again, I'm kind of using a reverse metaphor, is if you want to attract birds to your yard, you provide them food, water, and shelter. So if you want in the airport, it's the opposite. We want to keep birds away. So you remove food, water, and shelter. Does that make sense?
Exactly. You.
Um,
Okay. Yeah.
so like, I mean, it's everything from filling in ponds, getting rid of water. There's entire industry on mowing grass, on which grass height is more attractive. Really, it is like a whole industry.
Oh
Then it'll
wow.
go up to, so you have exclusion, you have changing the environment, and then you go up to harassment.
Yeah.
And harassment again, is a whole industry. It's
Oh,
a lot of it you can, from chasing them with trucks and honking the horn just to scare them off. They have these things, they look like firearms. They actually are firearms, but they're shooting these blanks that are kind of like firecrackers. They're called
okay.
screamers and bangers. And they can kind of shoot those off and it'll like
Mhm.
disperse a flock, right? To just scare them away. It can get quite creative. My personal favorite is they'll run border collies, they'll run dogs. It's nothing like putting a
No
predator on the
way.
airfield, right? And let that predator run around that those birds like bye. Right.
So yeah.
They'll fly birds of prey. They have falconers that will.
Yeah, that's what we used to have here in Windsor. Somebody that used to do a falcon program,
Yep.
so a falconer,
Yep.
and they used to use these raptors to scare away like smaller birds.
That,
However, the person that was in charge retired, and they haven't really like had another person step in and
yeah.
continue the program.
Yeah. A falconer is a highly specialized person, and they have to be certified, and they have a lot of legal things they have to do of care for their birds too. But um, I'll tell you, controlling wildlife. This is again my opinion. Controlling wildlife on an airfield is very, very difficult because
Yeah,
you're trying to work with things that adapt and have a brain, right? And they can be very persistent. So a lot of it will kind of turn into risk evaluations. So sometimes they'll
okay.
have to focus on some of the bigger, more damaging, and have to leave some of the little guys go because you can only do so much. You only have funding to do so much. They have a very
Yeah.
difficult job. Um, but part of the tools in the toolbox, like it sounds in Windsor, is they will trap and relocate.
Yeah.
Um, Usually works. Sometimes they'll come back. My guess is they're going to tag them and they'll know if they come back. They'll probably radio tag or
Exactly.
hand tag them. Um, Portland, Oregon has an amazing relocation program that they do. They actually put cameras and you can tap into their cameras on their raptors. Um,
Oh,
Plus, he's a friend of mine too. But they're very, very active in relocating red-tailed hawks because they're right in a migratory
okay.
funnel and they really get overrun with red tails. Um, Actually, I think you could find that on the Portland website, the Portland Airport website. Um,
Okay.
but I do, and I'm just being honest because I do kind of believe in being transparent. It can, and it's airfield by airfield. You can use lethal measures to remove birds,
Wow.
and it
Okay.
is done. You have to apply for permits to do it. It's not just allowed willy-nilly. You don't get to.
No, yeah.
You have to have your permits and uh, um,
Your license and
yeah, your
everything.
license, and it's very carefully tracked. They actually track by every cartridge. They have to account for every cartridge that goes
Okay.
into their guns. It's very regulated. Now I'm speaking for the United States.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what Canada's um, legal protocols are, but this is just our United States. Every airfield is different. Every
Yeah, they
airfield,
all have their own
they
rules and
do. They have to
regulations.
find their rules and the regulations and what they're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, we actually have certified wildlife biologists, actually certified airport wildlife biologists
Oh, wow.
on the majority of our large airfields. You'd never know. So, like if you go to Chicago, there's certified airport wildlife biologists. They have 5 of them, I think. That's
Wow.
all they do. And they do have the legal right, if they think an aircraft is in such danger, to remove that bird. And
Okay.
they do have firearms with them. Um, Obvious, is it the quick answer? Not really. And see, the biologists know
Yeah.
that. And I'm sorry to be blunt, but you can kill as many gulls as you want, and you're just going to get more gulls.
Yeah.
And we know that, right? So that's when your real hardcore people that know what they're doing, they're changing the environment.
Exactly. They're changing the habitat itself to
That's right.
make
Just
sure
you
that
don't
the
want to
animals
come
will come
here,
back.
right? Like you do not want to
Yeah,
come here. Look, this is all
exactly.
rocks. This is horrible.
Yeah,
Um,
it's not good for your reproduction, not good for your life here, so might as well not use it.
yep.
Yeah.
And by far, at least in the United States, I would probably say habitat management is one of the primary, like bird control.
Okay.
Um, the rest would be like harassment and exclusion. Fencing
Yeah.
is a must. And there's all kinds of, and they adapt. I just saw a video of a bear climbing like an 8-foot fence running across the airfield. And they're
Oh my
like,
God.
holy crap. And it had like barbed wire at top. And it just popped right over there. And you see
Yeah,
the
so
guys
you're
are
like,
like,
yeah.
so they have to shut down the runway. And, it's amazing. Wildlife is very, very adaptable. But yeah, I just kind of, you know, like the range, nothing is ever one thing, right? It's kind of like that in science a little bit, but in nature and the same with the bird strike world, you got to have a lot of tools in your toolbox
Yeah, to
because one thing
adapt
is not
and
going to, right?
exactly.
So yeah, I'm interested to see what your folks at Windsor. Tell them I
Yeah,
said hi.
me too.
We used to have we
Okay.
used to have a contract up with Canada. We gave that up, and one of our students is now at Guelph is
I golf,
working
yeah.
with the Canadian Bird Strike World. There is an association if you need stats, a Bird Strike Association for Canada
Yeah.
that probably have good stats on their website.
Yeah, just to get a more info on that because this is
Yeah, specifically for Canada too, if that's your focus, because I'm kind of
yeah,
talking United. So
yeah, no, but it's also good to know like not only about Canada or the United States, but like what I'm trying to work on is also like women in ornithology all around the world that have like influenced the field,
yeah,
and like help it to get to where it is today and where it could go.
we are slowly starting to get more women, and I mean like actively boots on the ground women
Yeah,
on the airfield. It's awesome, right? And that's really great to see. And with them, I'm kind of seeing the standards are kind of, maybe we hold ourselves to higher standards. I don't know.
I think we do sometimes, not to be
I don't. I
biased,
know. I
but
know. Right? I have to be careful what I say, but I don't know. I shouldn't say that because I know some really great, amazing biologists. Like Roxy said, you're a good biologist first, and then whatever you are after that, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Prove it with
Yeah.
your work.
It is. Your work will say everything
Will
about you.
talk, exactly. Your work will talk for itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I had a little bit more questions, but I think I just got a reminder from team saying that the meeting will end in 5 minutes.
No. I see. This is me. I get so bad. I talk too much.
No,
I do
it's
this.
okay. I'm learning so much.
How is your schedule? Do you need to go?
I might need to go soon.
Okay.
However, is it possible to reschedule another meeting just to continue the conversation?
Absolutely. I would be more than happy to talk to you. I could keep talking
Okay,
to you.
that would be great.
That's probably why Carla's like, hey Marcy, I think you and Andrea would be really good.
No, but this is a very interesting field that I didn't know that. Like I've had birds in the past, but as pets, and I've always loved watching birds, but I've never gotten myself into bird watching. And now with this organization, Peely Island, I'm learning so much about it and
Yeah.
just doing research. I'm like intrigued, and I'm like, this is
Yeah.
something that I could possibly do.
Well, you could, and as a student, that's what's the cool thing is you get to kind of go out there and learn about different things. Of
Yeah.
course, I would love to see you go into wildlife forensics. I'm a little biased, but because we need
But that's
good wildlife
okay.
forensic scientists. But yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and schedule. I'm pretty flexible.
Yeah. Is it
Because I
okay
can
if we
always just
schedule
sit there at
something
my
for
desk. I can just sit there
for
at my
next
desk.
week?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I'll try to see. I'll send you some possible dates for next week. That way we could just like catch up on what's been going on, and hopefully by that time I've had talk with like the airport facilities here to see what more information they can give me.
Yeah, I think that's a excellent point of view because those guys are out there every day doing the bird strike work. Like
Exactly.
we're just there to help them, like in the United States. But those are the guys on the ground or the folks
Yeah.
on the. I keep using.
Exactly.
But yeah, so give me. Um, I really check out the Wildlife Forensic
Yes.
Society,
The Swift. Yeah, and
SWIFS.
then yeah.
Um, let me put an email out to Ariel and see if she's
Oh, that'd be
around.
great.
And
Amazing.
check out like your Canadian Bird Strike Association.
Yeah.
You there's for the United States, and they have a lot of really good stats on bird strikes. Is the FAA?
Okay.
It's something like
Okay.
wildlife.faa.gov,
Okay.
or you could just look up like Wildlife FAA.
Yeah,
And
and then I'll find something. Yeah.
if you need something for the world, there is also a World Bird Strike Association if you
Okay.
want to go that big. But that's, that's up to you. But I did want to tell you about Swifts and kind of encourage you uh,
To just take a
to
look
do
at
that.
it and how. Yeah.
And before we leave, um, because you're kind of, are you doing like bird collision or building collisions too, right?
Yeah. So what we're setting out right now on the ground, we're essentially doing bird collisions specifically on buildings because here in
Thanks.
Windsor, there's the Detroit River right in front of us. There's
Yeah.
Detroit, and that is a big path for
Yeah.
migratory birds.
Yeah.
So obviously, it's mainly more in April and May that there's more bird collisions, but also end of August, beginning of September. So during the summer, I'm still collecting data just to see like how often it happens during a while when it's not like the migratory season
The
per se.
peaks. Okay. All right.
Exactly. But still, they're going to continue the data as well later in September because they
Excellent.
have been collating data, I think, for the past year.
Okay.
So then they're just going to build up in order to get more statistics.
Okay. So I'm going to throw out a name to you that is an ornithologist specifically for building collisions.
Okay.
And the folks you're working with at Peely probably know who he is. His name is Daniel
Yeah.
Klem, Klem.
Lem. Okay.
And he is like Mr. Building Strike. He
Okay.
for United States. He's down in Pennsylvania, or at least he was. He might be retired now. I don't know. I
Okay.
would, if nothing else, he publishes. So for your
I could
work,
take a look. Yeah.
right, if you need to reference him, he's out of Pennsylvania, Daniel Klem, Klem.
Klem. Okay.
And if
Perfect.
you're
Yeah.
working with building bird strikes, that's like the guy.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, because we do inform people, especially like small businesses, if they
Yep.
want like the window collision tape kits. That
Yep.
way they could help out
Yep.
Windsor, the city itself,
Yeah.
because
And
it
I
gets
think
to some.
he does a lot of that, like
Okay.
test the different like surfaces and all that, the different angles
Oh,
of, yeah, it is pretty, if you're
that'd be
into building
amazing.
collisions, that's the guy.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much for all this
I'm going to give you way too much information, right?
It's okay. It's okay. Better more,
Okay,
and I get to like just look at little snippets of everything and have a bigger image.
good. Well, I'm just going to dump a bunch of information on you and then you can kind of pick one.
That's perfect. That works with me.
Okay. All right. Well, just send me a email or something. We can, I'm happy to talk to you again.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And hopefully by next week we can talk more about this.
Yep, yep. And try to rein me in on questions, so I don't talk too
Okay.
much.
It's all good. All right. Have a good day. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Marcy.
All right. Bye.
Bye.